Hi everyone, my name is Julia and I'm CEO and co-founder of S.Lab. And welcome to another episode of Show Me Your Actions podcast. Here we discuss all things about sustainability, climate tech, and circular economy. And today we are glad to welcome Daniel Seager, our guest with massive background in both. Daniel has more than 15 years of experience in sustainability, compliance, and corporate strategies in companies like HP, LG Electronics, and WWF. So, hi everyone, and today is our episode of Show Me Your Actions podcast, and we have an amazing guest, Danielle, with me. And my first question is for you, with more than 15 years of experience in sustainability, compliance, and corporate sustainability strategies in companies like HP, LG Electronics, and WWF, what drives you personally to work in these fields, and what keeps you motivated to do this to this day?
Very good. Well, thank you, Julia. Thanks for the invite. It's great to be here. It's been a while since we last met. I know that you and I met in Berlin at the an award by the Landau Group for S.Lab. So it was great to meet you there and see your company. Um, and yeah, so what motivates me is I've always been interested, in our planet. Ever since I was young, I've been interested in geology, how forests grow, how plants interact and compete for light, how how we live on the planet and how we use it and what we're doing to it. And so I've really always been interested in this. I studied geography when I was in an undergraduate in the UK in Sussex University. God, that was a long time ago. And then I went into working in resource management. I did a master's in kind of environmental resource management, where my focus was really kind of water management, forestry management. How can we value natural resources so that we can actually represent the benefit they give us in economic decision making, which is mostly looking at things like money, right? And so kind of my thesis was actually looking at how can you restore the Zambezi Delta floodplains in Mozambique, because they've got this hydropower station there. It's
Wow.
stopped all of the flooding, the natural cycle, right? Man has stopped the natural cycle of that river. And so I
Mhm.
looked at that and looked at kind of, could we mimic, new flood patterns, etc. So anyway, this is my interest. I'm really fascinated about the natural world. I'm very concerned about, how we are damaging our planets irreversibly in some cases. And so, yeah, that's what drove my interest in kind of moving into this sustainability area. And then I kind of got into the corporate world kind of by mistake, really.
Mhm.
I really thought that my trajectory would be in, resource management,
Mhm.
ecosystem valuations, more in the academic space. But I was desperate for money, desperate for a job after leaving university, and I got offered a position in LG Electronics. And it was in their sustainability organization, and I was involved in looking at e-waste policy, implementation of extended producer responsibility, um, policy within the company, compliance strategies, etc. And so I kind of got involved like that, and I never looked back really. So 15,
Mhm.
almost 15 or just over 15 years later, I'm still working in corporate sustainability. I'm now with HP. And what I like to do is coming to work every day and knowing that, you can make a change, you can make an impact in, how we set expectations to our customers, to our people, how we work with our suppliers to drive change. And so that's really what keeps motivating me, is the knowledge that, you know, I can make a change through the work I do through my company and my actions.
That sounds incredible. And I like how your story turned out that, from thinking that you will work with the environment, going to corporate, but actually continuing with your mission. And I think this is so important to stay to your true values. And I
Mhm.
believe that's what you are truly doing. And thank you for mentioning HP, because actually my question is about what you do in HP in terms of um, implementing those sustainable strategies.
Mhm.
And I do know that you are building circular economy models in HP and specifically transforming refurbishment services and repair services strategies. So, can you tell more about HP's approach to circularity by
Mhm.
extending the life of the product, time of the life, and are the customers actually ready to support big companies in such efforts?
Yeah, sure. So let me start a little bit about what I do in HP and my role. So I've had multiple roles in HP. I started really kind of looking at, packaging regulations, e-waste, battery packaging. It's kind of a trinity of EPR
Mm-hmm.
regulations for
Mm-hmm.
companies like ourselves. But more recently, that was very much focused on recycling, material recycling, right? And back in those days, it was very much a compliance-driven thing. Companies got involved in doing this because we had to. It was kind of a stick thing. HP is a little bit different in that sense, but we have always had a recycling program. Well, always, we've had a recycling program
Mm-hmm.
far
Mm-hmm.
earlier than any of these extended producer responsibility regulations came through. But the big driver, I think, for a lot of companies has been, we need to do this. It's compliance. Um, so I evolved around, I moved away from the recycling space about 8, 9 years ago, and I moved more into services, and then more so into circular IT. Um, and what circular IT means is more how can we extend the product life cycle beyond, 3, 4 years? How
Mm-hmm.
can we get our devices reused, refurbished? What are the design changes we need to make with our
Mm-hmm.
devices to enable the second, third, and longer life, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm now working in our supply chain. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the supply chain in HP follows what we call a SCORE model, a supply chain operational reference model. And
Mm-hmm.
what that basically says is that supply chains typically have core functions, right? You are buying material, you are making products, you're distributing them or you're shipping them to markets. You have a planning organization which plans how that all works. You have an enablement function, which is how we are resilient, how we transform our
Mm-hmm.
supply chains, and that's a horizontal. The sustainability piece is also a horizontal. But then we have our return supply chain, and that's where
Mm-hmm.
I work, right? So I work in our
Okay.
return or reverse supply chain, and this supply chain is all about reuse, repair, and recycling, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what I'm doing in HP. And I think to your other question about are customers ready for,
Yep.
circularity? Um, so I'll tell you a little story. We've been refurbishing PCs probably, we've gone through a journey in the last 4 or 5 years to start a business around refurbishing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been involved in that from the beginning, and it kind of started during COVID, right?
Okay.
And what happened during COVID? We all went home, right? We all went
Yep.
home. Education went home. We went from having, people worked at home. We went from having a PC per family to a PC per
Mm-hmm.
person.
Yep.
And what that meant is that we couldn't manufacture them fast enough during COVID, right? And it was a
Yeah.
boom time for the industry. But
Mm-hmm.
there was also a time of huge supply chain disruptions. People went home, our
Yep.
supply chains were
Mm-hmm.
disrupted. We had a huge demand for PCs. And so HP is a company of like 50,000, 55,000 employees, and we all need PCs, right? And during COVID, we still needed to renew and refresh
Yep.
our fleet, but we were bottom of the line, right? Because our customers were getting priorities.
Yeah.
Our customers were calling our CEO, our chief supply
Oh
chain
wow.
officers, their sales managers, and saying, I want PCs. And so in HP, we started figuring out, well, how can we extend the life of the devices? How can we keep
Mm-hmm.
working? And so we started refurbishing, right?
Nice.
And that's where this whole refurbishment business model started. We looked at our customers and they were saying the same to us. It's like, I need PCs. I can't get my hands on them.
Mm-hmm.
Help me extend the device life of the PCs. I'm happy to pay more for a device which will last longer than, buying two devices at X price. I'm happy to buy one device at
Nice.
Y price. And so we
Yeah.
started building our refurbishment business models. We realized that we can actually save customers money at the
Mm-hmm.
same time as lowering their carbon footprint. And so our value
Nice.
proposition around, circular economy was really successful because we were able to pair reduction in cost because you're extending the life of your PC and you're adding a refurbishment pit stop midway through, and you're going from
Mm-hmm.
4 years to 8 years or from 4 years to seven, depending on the customer here. And at
Yeah.
the same time, because you're using your PC for longer, you're having a reduced carbon impact for that PC,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and and customer acceptance on that has been mixed. I think that
Mm-hmm.
we have been successful with some forward-facing customers who are they see the value of reducing their IT fleet carbon footprint. A lot of
Yeah.
customers don't typically buy with sustainability fully integrated into their IT strategy. Okay,
Right.
and so it's very few companies are actually driving circular IT within their strategies. I just saw an Accenture report a couple of days ago which said that the least implemented strategy for driving down carbon footprints from large corporations is actually green IT. Most of them focus on renewable energy,
Mm-hmm.
waste minimization, efficiencies, and much less on things like green IT. Anyway, I'll stop there. I know I'm giving you a very long answer, but did I answer all your questions?
Yeah, this was amazing. Actually, I like how COVID triggered some of the sustainability strategies and actions. And like what I see is that with what you did, it actually increased efficiency of your machines twice because now instead of 4 years, users can use it for 8 years. And I think
Mhm.
this is exactly what we need, this type of actions.
Absolutely. And I always tell a story with this when I look at, you know, we come from a linear economy, right? Where we
Mm-hmm.
typically we we
Yeah,
we take, make, use, dispose, and repeat.
yeah,
Um, and the mindset of many industries in manufacturing and designing products which are sold transactionally, right? Is
mm-hmm.
that we support them for 1 or 2 years in the warranty period, and then
Yeah,
companies typically look, okay, when am I going to make my next revenue cycle? Um,
yeah.
and and so they haven't had that mindset to think about the service life of that
Mm-hmm.
product. And this is not just,
Yeah.
companies in the IT space, it's many companies. Consumer electronics
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
probably a key sector. And I like to compare that to a racing game, Formula One,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you think about Formula One, it's a race, right? It has a start, they race 80 laps, and they have a pit
Yeah.
stop in the middle. And that pit stop is to service the vehicle, right? So it can continue going
Mm-hmm.
on for the second half of the race.
Right.
Okay, and that pit stop used to last 60 seconds back in the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
And the world
Mm-hmm.
record, can you guess what the world record is for the pit
I
stop?
would say less than 10 seconds, probably.
It's less than 2 seconds. It's like
Less than
one
two
point, it's
seconds.
1.7 or 1.8 seconds in Abu Dhabi a few years ago, a Red Bull
Mm-hmm.
team, I think it was. And it's
Wow.
amazing. If you look at the video, they change all four tires in less than two
Mm-hmm.
seconds. And they've done that through innovation, right? They've innovated the car, which you can think
Mm-hmm.
of like the
Mm-hmm.
product. So you can think of like the PC is the product.
Yeah.
They've innovated the processes, the tools. And so they've gone from 50 down to 1.7 seconds because that pit stop mattered.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
part of the rules of the game,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when we manufacture and design a product, or whenever companies design products which they just sell to forget, they don't incentivize, they're not incentivized to design that product to be
Yeah.
repaired
Mm-hmm.
quickly or to be
Mm-hmm.
serviced quickly, to be brought
Yeah.
back into the race, because the second life has never been part of the race. And so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's what's changing now, right? With these refurbished reuse business models, which companies like HP are developing and investing in. is all of a sudden the second life and the steps to get to second life, changing the battery, relocalizing the keyboards,
Mm-hmm.
bringing the cosmetics back up to, you know, good standards,
Yeah.
has not been part of the rules of the game until now, right? And so it's
Yeah.
changing that mindset in the companies and the design teams into, how can we now make a product which you can change from a French keyboard to a Spanish keyboard
Mm-hmm.
um, within 1.7 seconds, right?
Yeah.
So that's
Definitely the goal.
that's the rule. That's the kind of mindset change, I think,
Mm-hmm.
or not even mindset
Yep.
change, the incentives change, which
Yep. Exactly.
we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing and we're undergoing as a company today. And yeah, so it's a really exciting time to be in IT and in this space because it
Yeah.
there's a lot of change we're seeing
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
driving more circularity, but it's slow and it's an uphill climb.
Of course, of course. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that it is slow because yes, like we get excited about some initiatives and some things that are already done, but of course there is so much work to do. And I think
Mhm,
what you're saying is that starting from the design, then through innovation, we can actually drive towards circular economy with those, like if taking like very careful consideration of each stage and looking into every part of the process, how we produce something or how we deliver, or
mhm,
as you said, how we actually reuse that and extend the life of the products.
mhm. Exactly. And one of the challenges we have is our own minds. The
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
consumer's
Mm-hmm.
perception, right, is one of our biggest enemies in refurbishment. People typically tend to consider reuse as
Yeah.
inferior. And so there's a important kind of mindset change which we need to drive, and it can't be done
Yeah.
alone, by a company. It needs to be done
Exactly. Yeah.
by many different instruments,
Yeah.
policy instruments,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
companies, quality standards, trust in what you're buying. So yeah, there's an uphill struggle, and some of it's internal, how we design things, our business processes, but others are, are industry-wide challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, let's jump into industry challenges and overall. It's clear that sustainability is like no longer a trend; it is a necessity. Everyone understands that, and from my perception, for smaller companies, it is easier to implement some sustainable practices because like they are just smaller
Mhm,
than rather than corporations and multinational companies where there is lots of complexity and multi-level of the management. And at the same time, from corporations, it is expected to have more actions towards sustainability and circular economy. So, from your perspective, how sustainability is influencing corporate strategies today?
mhm. Yeah, I would agree that it is easier for smaller companies to,
Mm-hmm.
SMBs, startups, to drive sustainable strategies within their corporations. They're first of all smaller, they can adapt to new practices, to new market dynamics faster, than large corporations. And then you know, you also have more granular control over your supply chains and your suppliers. So I agree it's easier. I also agree that, larger companies have an oversized responsibility to act, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the ability to do so is really from their financial capital, their knowledge capital. We can typically afford, larger corporations. I'm not just talking about, HP. I'm talking about big companies. Really, you know, that's what they need to do, right? And HP, for example, our carbon footprint um, last year was just under 20 million tons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at global anthropogenic carbon footprint, it's 54 billion tons or 54 gigatons.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
HP was 0.04% of global
Mm-hmm.
greenhouse gases.
Mm-hmm.
And if you put 25 companies together the same size as us, we represent 1%. And
Mm-hmm.
that's half of the entire aviation industry. Aviation is 2%, right? So
Yeah.
so so you start seeing how
Mm-hmm.
big companies can drive big
Yeah.
change, right? And so
Yeah.
our strategy is to be net zero by 2040. It's a
Mm-hmm.
science-based aligned goal. And the more companies which are adopting these practices, you start seeing how they can start having large impacts. I think the other space is, you know, we can set expectations.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about, the automobile sector, I think about them quite a lot when I think about how IT needs to be circular and how the automobile industry has designed supply chains to have parts available for vehicles which are maybe 20 years old,
Yeah.
and how they typically rely on reused parts. They don't have parts sitting in warehouses for 20 years until some,
Mm-hmm.
and so the automobile industry I find fascinating from how they've implemented circularity. But I was talking about setting expectations. And if you think about a lot of the automobile industries have now come out with very bold statements saying that
Mm-hmm.
by 2030, or maybe it's 2040, we will no longer sell
Yeah.
internal
Mm-hmm.
combustion engine vehicles,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's shunning fossil fuels, and they're
Yeah.
fully embracing. They're making very bold statements and saying we will no longer sell ICE vehicles from
Yeah.
20. I like to think it's 2030, but I think it's 2040. And
Yeah.
what does that do? That is very powerful in setting expectations, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're
Mm-hmm.
giving clarity to your suppliers who need to go out and invest large amounts of
Yeah.
capital in developing supply chains for electric vehicles or potentially hydrogen powered vehicles. You're setting expectations to consumers that the next vehicle maybe should be an electric one, or at least
Yeah.
plug-in
Mm-hmm.
hybrids. And you're setting expectations towards governments that, hey, we should help these companies, and drive policy to further solidify, this tipping point. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that large companies are having a knowledge capital, um, you know, financial capital to make a change,
Mm-hmm.
but also
Mm-hmm.
the setting expectations and driving tipping
Yeah.
points is another kind of less tangible, um, thing which large companies can do around sustainability, which is important. So we need to actually proactively do that together. So yeah,
Yeah.
I hope that
Yeah.
answered your question.
Definitely, and I think it's like a snowball effect, because like them automotive stating that they will not sell, or they encourage buying electrical vehicles. Then this also means that the infrastructure has to be developed for the charging of those vehicles.
Hmm.
So it's also driving the whole industry, I would say, because then more regulations on and policies for that, and then we are creating actually new businesses. So like the sustainability is often seen that, well, all right, we don't use any more of gas and petrol, but what do we do with all of those people who work for those industries? Well, then there is a new industry that is created, as we say, and as we build other vehicles, other type of the products.
Hmm. Exactly. The world needs to evolve and jobs will change. Like we're going to see that with
Yep.
AI right now. No, it's AI is going to have a massive change. A lot of people fear that
Yeah.
AI is going to, replace their jobs, but I think it's going to just make us more efficient at what we do
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
change the way we work and make us more productive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. True. So then, from your experience, what are the best practices for actually setting and then achieving net zero targets, and what are the actual challenges with while implementing them?
Wow. Yeah, that's a big one. So, you know,
Hmm.
more and more companies are setting goals. In fact, I read just the other day that 37% of all of the largest 2,000 companies in the world have already set goals. However, I think it was only 17% are actually on track with their goals. 18%. That's an
Hmm.
Accenture report from last year. So we're seeing more and more companies setting big goals, which is great. And actually, one of the things which we found, it's a little side topic, is that, um, that's a common interest which we find with a lot of customers. Um, you know, so
Hmm.
our our products and services can be a large contributing portion of our customers' carbon footprints or greenhouse gas goals, right? And so it, it it's interesting that the more companies which are setting these net zero goals, it's actually driving commercial um, relations, discussions, and with shared interests, like how can I help you to decarbonize so that you can help me
Mm-hmm.
decarbonize as well, right? One of our decarbonization strategies is through our circularity, right? When we set our net zero goal, what we need to do is, first of all, it needs to be a net zero goal aligned to science, ideally,
Mm-hmm.
verified by a third party like SBTI or something like that. It should have clear timelines. It should have near-term goals. It shouldn't just be a 2050 goal and we'll forget about it until 2045. You should have interim goals. And so with HP, we've got a goal for 2025 to be 100% carbon neutral within our operations. That's just in a year's time. Um, then we've got a 2030 goal to be 50% down in our
Yeah.
value chain, greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3. And we're down 27% so far. And so it's going down, but probably not fast enough, right? So we've come
Mm-hmm.
down half as to what we need to be. We still need to go another 50% to get to that 50% reduction. And then you have your 2040 or 2050 goal. In the case of HP, it's a 2040 net zero goal across our whole value chain. So that's the 19 million tons of carbon I
Yeah.
just mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So comprehensive scope, clear timelines, science-based goals. But then what we did is we look at, okay, what is our footprint? And here's one of the challenges is actually measuring it, having standards which allow us
Mm-hmm.
to measure
Yeah.
it, getting data from our suppliers, from our
Yeah.
complex value chain is a clear challenge. But we looked at what is our impact as a company, our
Mm-hmm.
materiality kind of impact. And at HP, at least, we're a company which puts on the market every year 800,000 tons of material, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
1,600 Airbus A380s, right? Or 18 Eiffel Towers. And that's a
Yeah.
lot of material. And that material today is typically, you know, non-circular. It's coming from hard to mine metals. And so we need to address that. We need to address our material consumption, and that's where circularity comes in. Um, but we also have a very large carbon footprint, so we need to set a net zero goal. But the main way of doing that is going to be through circularity and energy
Mm-hmm.
efficiency of our products. And then the other impact which we have on the planet is we are a printing company, right? And so a lot of
Mm-hmm.
paper comes through our products, and paper comes from forests, and therefore forestry
Yeah.
is also a third element of our goal. So I
Mm-hmm.
think having a comprehensive understanding of what are your emissions, what's driving
Yeah.
them, and then having a strategy to address those things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so for
Mm-hmm.
HP, it's very much circular economy because two-thirds of our footprint is coming from our materials, and then one
Yeah.
third is coming from their energy consumption. So those are our two big
Mm-hmm.
ticket items when it comes to our net zero strategy. We need to focus on material circularity, but also business models circularity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of companies I see in the market today, when you go and talk about circularity, they just talk about their material flows. A lot of companies talk
Mm-hmm.
about recycling
Yeah.
products when used or using recycled content in the manufacturing stage. Less companies talk about reuse, and even fewer companies talk about circular business models, right? Which is the
Yeah.
other element, right? You've got material models, circularity models, and then you've also got circular business models. And what that means is like, how do you get products back so that you can reuse them, right? And so you're moving away from that transactional, selling and saying goodbye
Yeah.
for the next 4 years
Mm-hmm.
to driving a as a service model, right? Where we instead
Mm-hmm.
of sell a PC, we sell an experience and we sell access to computing power, right? So
Yeah.
that PC remains ours, which means
Mm-hmm.
that the cost of servicing it, the cost of repairing it is our cost. The recovered material value at the end of use is ours, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden it allows you to practice your circular material models through your circular business models. Um, so that's another area, and I think engaging stakeholders, right, is, like I said, the
Mm-hmm.
biggest enemy is perception of reuse.
Yeah.
We have lots of challenges in um, how do we convince customers? How do we convince our suppliers to continue repairing, continue manufacturing parts
Mm-hmm.
beyond, like the
Mm-hmm.
Volkswagen
Mm-hmm.
example or the vehicles example? How do they get their
Yeah.
parts back for 20 years? And
Mm-hmm.
so, we negotiate with our suppliers to try to get longer parts support life. We negotiate with some of the operating system companies, the software providers, to make sure that those softwares and operating systems are supported for longer. So we also need to engage stakeholders, and then I think at the very end, like, we're looking at what can we decarbonize quickly, the low hanging
Mm-hmm.
fruit. What can we
200. Mm-hmm.
decarbonize through, structural changes to our business, like business model transformations, to enable more circular economy, but we're always going to have a residual footprint at the very end. And here, we also need to look at carbon removal technologies. How do we invest in clean technologies like electric vehicles for our fleet engineers, or renewable energy, so that we can operate, um, with you know with renewable energy. So there's also that element to it, right? Investing in industrial
Mm-hmm.
transformation and carbon
Yeah.
removal.
Wow, Daniel, I think you gave like a step-by-step work plan how to actually, transition from linear economy to circular economy. And I like your approach at HP that you start with transparency and like clearly calculating what are your emissions, what is your footprint, and then actually when you realize the quantity, the amount of that sort of a problem, you can actually solve, because we all know that understanding the problem is 50% of solving the problem. So like I really like this approach that you have.
Yeah, I like that. Very good.
Good. And then my least favorite topic in all of the circularity and sustainability, but very, very important, the regulations. So EU is putting more and more regulations and directives on the companies.
Hmm.
And it's not only about transitioning to more sustainable business practices, but also against green claims, greenwashing. And my question would be to you, how to navigate all of these regulations, and are there any practices of implementing green transition policies in corporations, or any specific obstacles?
Yeah, so regulation is definitely growing. It's one of the, we put a graphic in front of our executive leadership every year, and our board of directors, which shows
Mm-hmm.
them the growth in environmental, kind of ESG regulations, and you can imagine the trajectory that graphic is taking.
Yeah.
It's very fast growing. We're seeing a lot of growth in take back regulations. We're seeing a lot of growth in
Mm-hmm.
circular economy regulations, and that's very much
Mm-hmm.
coupled with interest from customers as well. I would say that how to navigate this is we need to track them. We need to be
Mm-hmm.
involved in their creation,
Oh yeah.
right? Participate in the dialogue. Um, Regulations don't come from nowhere. They typically come from,
Mm-hmm.
academia, they come from various different places, and they have various different timelines and life cycles,
Yeah.
in going from academia in the corridors to actual firm policy. Sometimes it takes 10 years. Like the We Directive took 10 years from when it was first discussed and conceived
Mm-hmm.
to when we actually had in 2002 the first European We Directive.
Yeah.
So I think it's track. We need a very good tracking mechanism to make sure that we're not caught
Mm-hmm.
out. We need to know what's happening. We need to get involved, be part of the
Yeah.
dialogue, make sure that the regulations which are being developed make sense, are driving change, are having the impact that they're expected to have, right? Let's be good partners with this, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Good players, but also acting early. Okay,
Yeah.
it's a very important to have foresight as to what's the world going to look like from a regulatory perspective, but not just regulatory, what are our customers' demands going to be, our customer needs in, say, 5, 10, 15, but even 20, 30 years, so that we have the foresight to, you know, act and adapt. Um, I give you an example of how being engaged in regulation dialogue is really important to keep regulations on track. And a lot of people probably listening to this think, oh, big companies are trying to, avoid regulation and
Mm-hmm.
advocate to lobby. And, that of course happens, right? In
Yeah.
the world, oil and gas have historically been trying to, you know, reduce interest in climate change to continue their business models. The tobacco industry is famous for trying to
Yeah.
downplay the damages, but there are some you know good players as well and some good intentions in this, and for example, there's been a lot of interest over the last 10-15 years in electronic waste, and a lot of perception about how it's damaging developing countries, how the rich north are sending e-waste to the south,
Yeah.
where it ends up in landfills, being burned, and all of the toxic, you know, contents being, you know, seeping into the environment or worse, affecting human health. And so they had this Basel regulation come along, right? Which is basically,
Mm-hmm.
it's a regulation governing transboundary movements of waste, and its objective
Mm-hmm.
is to prevent dumping of, toxic, hazardous waste to places where they don't have the capability to address that waste. And this is absolutely
Yeah.
great. That's needed, right? We need to sort our own
Mm-hmm.
waste in the countries where we have the technology to do so.
Yeah.
However, um, the way in which this regulation has been developed has started hampering our
Mm-hmm.
ability to operate at circular scale, operate circularity
Okay.
at scale. And it says so. So a lot of companies have put up barriers to
Mm-hmm.
imports of used electronic equipment,
Yeah.
and they've prohibited imports,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's an overreaction to a problem which they see is very difficult to
Mm-hmm.
enforce, right?
Yeah.
How do you define whether a container of PCs is destined for disposal, illegal disposal, or
Mm-hmm.
destined for legitimate
Yeah.
reuse, right? And so companies like ourselves, we operate, at scale. We cannot have repair lines in every single country. We
Right.
do not refurbish, you know, in every country in Europe, in every country in the world. And so we rely on the ability to move equipment to strategic locations to
Mm-hmm.
have economies of scale and reuse, right? And so that's the regulation which we're involved in to try to find ways to address the objective of
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
regulation, but in such a way that it doesn't hamper us from being able to
Yeah.
achieve something which is equally important: circularity and carbon reduction.
Yeah, I think involvement, as you say, is crucial, and of course from different stakeholders because everyone brings a very different perspective. So 100% on that with you. And I think this was like such a fruitful conversations with so many insights. And as I said, like I think those who will listen to this podcast, they will actually have clear actions how to implement sustainable strategies and how to turn to more circular economy. And I would like to end with one last question. What key sustainability trends do you see for next year, and in which direction are we going to lean?
So I don't think we're going to see a major shift in trends year over year in sustainability. I think, we're still going to have, you know, focus on renewable energy, investing in
Mm-hmm.
clean technologies, sustainable agriculture. Those are the key kind of drivers to continue us on a trajectory. But I would like to add that we're seeing a lot of talk about AI in the world today, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of interest in AI, and so a lot of people think, and I've also been questioning, like, how does AI impact our
Mm-hmm.
plan to drive
Yeah.
to net zero, right? AI is typically requiring very powerful processors, high energy consumption. You're looking, I'm reading about Google or Microsoft, one of these large, companies which run servers, AWS, investing or,
Mm-hmm.
looking at investing in nuclear energy to try and power
Yeah.
their power
Mm-hmm.
stations. And is that the
Mm-hmm.
right direction? And so I think that
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be a bit of a, you know, how does AI drive, is it contrary to our goals? And I've been looking, researching a bit about this, and the counter argument, and I'm not making this argument myself, I'm just informing what I've read, and it's still to be proven
Yeah.
right or wrong, that the counter argument is that AI is going to help drive an acceleration of adoption of clean technologies. It's going to make agriculture more it's going to be able to process data quicker to make decisions. Agriculture is just an example, but in supply chains, in the creation of new technologies for more efficient products, energy consumption, and maybe that's going to help offset some of the growth in the energy consumption. So I think there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely going to be a
Mm-hmm.
trend to keep, in summary, maybe
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to see many changes in the major trends around sustainability. It's still going to be, how do we reduce our carbon footprint? How do we drive more efficiency in our industries? How do we transition more to cleaner technologies? How do we decarbonize our industries? You know, um, Optimizing energy use and accelerating, adoption of clean technologies in agriculture. But I think there's going to be a enhanced interest in how is AI
Mm-hmm.
influencing and impacting that agenda. Is it helping
Yeah.
or is it hampering? And I think,
Yeah.
we're yet to see where that goes.
Exactly. Yeah. It's actually exciting to see where we go. Like because it's a very dynamic environment that we live in, and yes, I think AI is definitely accelerating the
They
development of many things.
they say AI is helping accelerate exponentially the
Mm-hmm.
testing and finding of new
Oh yeah.
vaccines, right?
Mm-hmm.
How you test and find exactly the right RNA
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
vaccine to
Yeah.
treat a particular problem. So that's super exciting to see, that it can have a very strong and positive impact on human health problems, and perhaps it will also have a very strong impact on our sustainability and climate crisis. So
Yeah.
fingers crossed.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Well, Daniel, thank you for such an amazing conversations and so many insights.
No
And
problem. Thanks for the invite.
yeah, very happy. Yeah, very happy to have you as our guest. And thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Julia. Thank you very much, and take care.
Next episode is coming soon, so hit like and subscribe.